Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Josh Lewin, the voice of the UCLA Bruins. He's a select announcer as well for the Red Sox, formerly with the Chargers, the Mets, and many other capacities, including Fox Sports. Josh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Billy, a pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to start off with first, how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, you know better than anyone, this is something that has really impacted our lives both professionally and personally this last year. So how have you been handling this last year?
Yeah, I mean, the good news for me, I'm really lucky to be based out here in Solana Beach, California, where it's a little slice of paradise. I mean, so, when they say to shelter at home, home is with a view of the Pacific Ocean, and, there's pretty sunsets and all of that. So I really can't complain. And, professionally, we're all in the same boat. It's just difficult, it's challenging, but we're thankful for our health.
For sure, and I wanted to go to a couple different stops in your career. You called Chargers games for 12 seasons from 2005 to 2016. What are some of your favorite memories with the Chargers?
Well, I was really lucky. That was kind of a sweet spot for at least for most of that in Chargers history. These last 2 years, not so much, but you had number 17 and number 21 and number 85, and that's pretty much all you needed. Phillip Rivers was an amazing quarterback and was there to follow the arc of his career. LaDainian Tomlinson, obviously a Hall of Famer, and Antonio Gates will be too. So they had some really good teams that made it a lot of fun, very passionate fan base, and that's really what turned me on to San Diego. I was commuting in and out, kind of a gun for hire to do those games, and just really fell in love with the area. So that's where I settled, and couldn't be happier about that.
And I wanted to ask you, I mean, you mentioned three guys who are, in my opinion, Hall of Famers: Phillip Rivers, LT, Antonio Gates, three staples of that team for so many years. Can you put into perspective what it was like to cover those guys, especially a guy like Phillip Rivers who just recently retired?
Yeah, they always made things interesting. Unfortunately, they never won the big one. They never even got to a Super Bowl. The closest they came, they were actually in a championship game in New England and just didn't have their weapons. I mean, all those guys were various degrees of hurt in that game, and they never did go. But there was always excitement, that's for sure. Sean Merriman was a great pass rusher for a few years there. I mean, they had some really, really talented players and great rivalries with the Raiders and the Broncos and the Chiefs. So as I stepped into doing NFL, I couldn't have asked for a better situation.
And one story I really wanted to ask you about, Josh, and because I was reading about this, and you can confirm me if this is true. Did you actually charter a private plane at your own expense from a Chargers-Ravens game to Game 5 of the 2015 World Series between the Mets and Royals? I mean, how did all that happen? Can you give me this behind the scenes of that story?
Yeah, so, I mean, you do what you got to do. Unfortunately, when you spread yourself so thin, you leave yourself open to scheduling conflicts. And, nobody really saw the Mets making a World Series, but you certainly want to be there for that. And fortunately, that was an 8 o'clock p.m. first pitch. It wasn't that much of a stretch to get from Baltimore after a 1 o'clock kick, back up there. I just didn't trust the airline. I mean, everything had to go just right. There was, as I recall, like a 5:30 flight or something like that from BWI that would have landed at 6:30, but we all know how that works, especially on a late day Sunday, and, those planes can get delayed, if it's even for an hour, then I'm in trouble. So I just knew that the safest thing to do would be to do it the other way. And hired a guy. It was pricey, but it was worth it. As soon as the game was over, it ended on a last second field goal of all things. I got in a hired car and sped away to a private airstrip, and I felt like a real big shot. But that was memorable, and I was actually packed to go to Kansas City right after that game. Because if the Mets had won, there would have been Game 6 in Kansas City, so I would have been on the team charter to make it a really interesting day. But 12-inning game, the Mets lost to Kansas City, and the World Series ended.
You've been with the UCLA Bruins since 2016. How did this opportunity open up at UCLA, and what was so enticing about it?
Well, I love the area, first of all. I mean, I really was looking for a way to concentrate my efforts geographically. It's not that I was looking to give up the Mets necessarily, but, there were rumors of the Chargers maybe moving up to LA, and I had no idea what that landscape would be if things changed with the radio rights holders. So it was kind of hedging my bet, to be honest. I wanted to have something West Coast, and when that UCLA job open. That's just such an iconic brand. It's just such a wonderful, it's like Notre Dame or something like that, just on the West Coast. So was really happy that they were interested in my services and grabbed that. And it was tricky for a year. I juggled all three, Mets and Chargers and UCLA, and knew that one of those balls was going to have to drop. And the Chargers kind of made the decision for me as to which one, because indeed, when they went to LA, they said either you're all in or you're all out. We don't want you doing any other work. You've got to move to LA and headquarter there. No more baseball, and that just was a non-starter. So that's the one that dropped. And the Mets UCLA thing, it was kind of a weird bi-coastal commute for a couple of years, and that got a little bit cumbersome. So then I made the decision to look for some baseball work out here, which never, unfortunately, worked out the way I had hoped. So, the baseball side of everything kind of cooled, but the bottom line is I wanted to be out here on the West Coast, and UCLA has given me that opportunity.
What are some of your favorite memories so far behind the mic for the Bruins these last 5 years?
Well, I hope they're all still to come. I mean, football's been terminally mediocre at best so far. They've been to one bowl game in 4 years, and it wasn't much of a bowl game. And they've had some really rough patches, I guess, in 5 years out here now that I've been here. So basketball started with a bang when I got here. That was the Lonzo Ball year, and they won 31 games. I went to a Sweet 16, and really should have gone further than that, but didn't. And, so I'd like to think that there are going to be some really cool things about to happen, but so far it's been just kind of a lot of potential and not a lot of reality.
And I wanted to ask you, what was it like to cover that Lonzo Ball team? I mean, there was certainly a lot of fanfare around the Bruins. You had LeVar Ball kind of in the background. I mean, what do you remember in particular about that team that went to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, I frankly thought that this is kind of what I signed up for. It was just electric, and there's celebrities in the crowd, and it was a really big deal. And things really cooled soon after that. But that was, as you say, a very memorable season because they were scoring, seemed like 90 to 110 points every night. And Lonzo, you could tell, was going to be a star in the NBA. And the first game I did, I'll always remember they had 61 or maybe even 63 at halftime when they had their very first game. And I'm thinking, I hadn't done college basketball in several years, so I was out of breath. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I can keep up with this. So it was a really, really sizzling, electric kind of year, and everybody in LA is waiting for them to kind of recapture that.
And you called both the college football and NFL on radio. Are there any major differences in calling either sport on the radio?
Well, I think there are nuances with everything. I mean, even something as seemingly picayune as college versus pro football, there are certain things that are different. You have to be aware of. Just even things like where the touchbacks are. You start at the 20 or the 25, and then there's a larger discussion about the apples to oranges of, say, baseball to football. I mean, that's where it's really different, where it's a whole different mindset when you head in. But that's part of the excitement for me. I certainly respect guys that do only one sport and do it really well. I just always like kind of the mental gymnastics that come with going from one sport to another, and I'm fortunate that I've been able to keep that in my life.
And I've talked to other guys like Tony Castricone, the voice of the Washington Huskies, and he maintains that the Pac-12 is one of the best conferences to travel because you get to go to so many different big cities. What are some of your favorite places to go in the Pac-12, whether it's the actual stadium or the actual city, to just have a chance to go and see the city?
Yeah, my daughter just graduated University of Washington not too long ago, and she's up in Seattle. So selfishly, that's one I always like, and it's always been a favorite city of mine. You'd think that the trip to Cal and Stanford would be, because I love the Bay Area, I love San Francisco, but those are two places that are a little off the beat path, just in terms of getting around and getting to. It's not like we're staying at five-star hotels. We're just kind of trying to commute to campus there, but that's a fun trip. And I always really enjoy Boulder and Salt Lake City, a chance to get up into the mountains and do something different a little bit. So, yeah, we're blessed. I could do without Pullman, to be honest with you. But other than that, all the other stops in the league are pretty good.
And UCLA, USC, I mean, that's such a iconic rivalry, especially on the West Coast. For the fans regionally on the East Coast, or maybe just across the country who may not know what that rivalry is like, as the UCLA announcer, how do you describe what that rivalry is like, especially in the Pac-12 in California?
Yeah, it's funny because it's not usually something you associate with the West Coast, right? Is intensity, but that's the one time you really feel it, where it's you don't wear red ever if you're with UCLA, you don't wear blue ever if you're with USC, and that's when some feelings start percolating. And then I being from the East Coast, I mean it's not at the level of some of those East Coast or Midwest rivalries. I mean, I've been fortunate enough in college football to call some, Indiana, Purdue football games. I've always, kind of bucket listed doing a Duke, North Carolina basketball game. I mean, there are some great rivalries out there. This is one of them. I mean, it does have a little bit more of a West Coast chill to it compared to some on the East Coast. But for anything west of the Mississippi, I think it's the best there is.
And Josh, you've called, obviously a number of college football games, especially with the UCLA Bruins. My question is, do you think college football has a problem with parity? I mean, you look at really since the implementation of the college football playoff, you've only seen a few teams like the Alabamas, like the Clemsons, like the Ohio States. Maybe you sprinkle in another team or two given the year, but it really seems like the talent has concentrated to those top teams, and other iconic programs like UCLA, like USC, like Virginia Tech haven't really been able to break through since the college football playoff started. Do you think we have a problem with parity in the game? And if so, is there any way do you think you can legislate it? Or have you the mindset, look, Alabama and Clemson, they're going to recruit the best players. It's up to the other schools to be able to overtake them in recruiting and beat them.
Yeah, I hate to see it get to a point that kind of feels like it's already there, where you're just kind of trying to compete to be the best of the rest. But I think that's, in large measure where it goes. And even traditional powers, whether it's a Texas or an LSU or schools like that, I mean, it's almost like the best you can do is be the best of that second tier. And I guess that's just where we've arrived. It's tough to take the cool toys away from a lot of those schools. For me, I think UCLA alumni fans would certainly agree with this assessment, is that, it's a matter of building a fence around your own property. That, there are too many great players in play in that area that get away and go somewhere else. Go to Texas A&M or go to a University of Oregon. So, from out here, at least in this perspective, I think if UCLA can get their locals to stay home, I think they'll be in that group. But they'll never be where Alabama is right now unless things really legislatively change.
And you've also called hockey for the Detroit Red Wings and the Dallas Stars. I wanted to ask you, what is different about calling hockey?
Well, it moves real fast, but I think if you can do basketball, you can do hockey. The geography of the court and the ice are pretty similar, but hockey is such a rhythm sport. And, I've gotten into European soccer over the last few years, and the one thing I love about the English soccer announcers is it really is so much ebb and flow and decrescendo, and hockey gives you the opportunity to do that. I miss hockey. I think it's a real Mike Emmerich obviously is the best there ever was, but I think he's the perfect example of a guy that can build excitement and hold excitement, and it gives you a real chance to use your gift of language if you happen to have that. So, I think hockey is a tremendous sport for an announcer.
And you've done all of these sports. I mean, baseball, football, basketball, hockey. I was wondering which sport is the hardest, or maybe not hardest, but the most time-consuming to prep for?
Well, football by far is the most time-consuming, and, that's the one where you leave 95% of what you prep on the cutting room floor because the game moves fast enough to where you're just never going to get a lot of narrative at the end. There's 50 players on each side, so there's just from that standpoint, the sheer volume of it is kind of overwhelming, and the amount of available statistical information that's out there now too. So I'd say football by far is the toughest one to get a handle on with preparation. If you're doing your baseball right, meaning that you're prepping 365 days a year, just kind of like, keeping a file on whatever happens to come up. That one's not that bad prep-wise, although, these days better out there if you have that kind of a bent, and you just get overwhelmed with all of that. But basketball to me is a day off. Especially if you follow one team. UCLA is going to play, all these different Pac-12 teams twice a year, and it's almost like the first time you prep the Oregon State game or whatever. It's like, all right, well, you've done 80% of the work for the next Oregon State game already. And a lot of these teams have a rotation of 7 players, 8 players. So there's just not as much to have to get ready for, and the games are over in an hour 45. It's like going to a movie. So, all those years doing baseball, those games are 3 hours, 4 hours, and they're so languid. Basketball, before you know it, it's like, wait, game's over? You don't even realize it went that fast on you. So, very, very different in terms of how you get ready. No question about it.
And going back to hockey, I mean, hockey is considered one of the 4 major American sports, but it really feels like it still lags behind baseball and football and basketball. Do you think that there's tangible things hockey can do to really grow the popularity, or is it always going to be you think, just a secondary sport compared to the big 3?
I think it lends itself to being a regional sport. I mean, if you grow up playing it, you love it, and that's why it's so big in Detroit, for example, and all over Canada. I mean, if it's in your blood, there's nothing better. The problem is it's just kind of, I think, a passing fancy, or just something interesting to stop by and take a peek at if you're, out here in Anaheim or San Jose or a place like that. So I don't know if there's anything really that the sport itself can do. I mean, I think these outdoor games are so beautiful to watch. I mean, the ones that were just in Tahoe, insanely gorgeous from just a sight standpoint. They're just an assault on your senses. It's like, wow, I love watching this, even if I don't completely understand it. But I think hockey, from what I gather, is comfortable in its own shoes. That it is a kind of a regional thing. Either it's way in your blood. I mean, I saw that in Boston too. Bruins fans are crazy, and Flyers fans in Philly. So I think it's okay that it's like that.
And you've also hosted a radio show in the past. I mean, back in 2010, you used to host a radio show from the 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. slot. You've also hosted shows from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. How different is it to prep for a radio show as it is for a game?
Well, frankly, I think that's the toughest thing there is to do. And I marvel at the Colin Cowherds of the world that can talk extemporaneously about whatever comes up. I mean, the one thing about if you're only doing baseball or only doing football or even just those two is you prep only what you know is going to be on the test. And with a talk show, you never know what's going to be on the test. So you have to have such a breadth of knowledge, and I frankly found that just overwhelming. It's like, especially when I was just starting out doing sports talk in Baltimore. I was your age basically, and going to a market that I didn't really know, and you're all of a sudden people want to talk about the ACC. I didn't know anything about the ACC. They want to talk about lacrosse. I didn't know anything about lacrosse. All of that. So it's just to me, it's overwhelming and really impressive. The guys that can do it.
And speaking of market, I mean, like you've talked about, you're in Los Angeles. I was wondering, where do you think Los Angeles ranks as a sports town? I mean, I feel like much of the country kind of has a laissez-faire attitude of like, oh, you get to go to the beaches. Sometimes the fans may not necessarily be as into sports, at least from other parts of the country, the perception that is. But you've got UCLA, you've got USC, you've got the Lakers, the Dodgers, really all the professional sports teams. I mean, you've got a little bit of everything. So as someone who lives in LA, who works for the Bruins, where do you think LA ranks as a sports town?
Well, there's sheer volume of things to pick from. I mean, that helps, but then I think it also hurts. It dilutes the fever a little bit. You got the Lakers, the Clippers, the Kings, the Ducks, the Angels, the Dodgers, and on and on and on. And I got the Rams and the Chargers too, and USC and UCLA and 2 MLS soccer teams. So there's just so much that's there. And to your point, maybe this is oversimplifying it, but I don't think it's so much a beach thing or the laissez-faire attitude. I just think that when you grow up where there's snow and where there's just a lot of hardship in getting from point A to point B, like for example in New York, you're riding the subways and just serves as not only a distraction from all that, but it's a bond. It's something that everybody, if you are stuck on a subway for an hour, it's not moving, you can engage your neighbor about what's up with the Mets or what's up with the Knicks. And everything in LA, everybody's in their own car. Everybody's kind of off doing their own thing. So I think, there's a situation where the fans themselves are still very interested, but there's just not as much buddy-buddy about it, where you're interacting with the fans as much. Everybody's kind of bubbled up a little bit. And that stated, I still think the LA market, and I've seen it in San Diego too, they're still very energetic, very passionate fans. I mean, if you've been to a Dodger game, for as much flack as Dodger fans take about getting there late, leaving early, when they're there, they're into it, and they're really knowledgeable fans.
And Josh, we're kind of coming up on the end of our conversation here, so I'm really grateful for your time. One question I have is, what's your advice to aspiring sportscasters trying to make it during this pandemic? I mean, you know better than anyone. It's already a tough business to break into, and now we have to deal with the realities of this pandemic. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to make it in this profession?
Well, it's funny, Billy. I mean, I think in one way it's never been easier to break in, but on the other side, it's never been harder. And what I mean by that is there is just so much competition. Everybody, it's kind of like TikTok, everybody thinks they can be a star now. Everybody's got a dance move they can break out. Wasn't too long ago, you were just dancing in your own bedroom and nobody could see it. So you could be a total star, but who would ever know that? So there are plentiful opportunities now. That's the good news. If you can't get an actual internship or an actual, startup job, you can just hang up your own shingle. You can start up your own YouTube channel, do whatever, and get discovered that way. The world is your oyster in that regard. So that part's wonderful. But again, the problem is everybody now knows that. So it's just, it's tough to find room on the dance floor. That to me, that's the biggest issue right now for trying to break into the business is how do you rise above all that crowd and above all that noise. So I guess my basic advice is, first of all, be yourself. That's the one thing that you bring to the table that no one else can. The second thing would be to stay as patient as you can, because that's tough to watch other people maybe get a break. You haven't got yours yet, but you just got to keep working. And that's the third point, is perseverance. You just got to stay with it and get better every day, no matter what that means, whether that's, learn a new word, learn a new rule in whatever sports that you're interested in, make a new contact on LinkedIn. I mean, there's always one thing a day you can do to get a little closer to your goal. So I wish everybody, all the men, all the women out there, I mean, it's a wonderful profession. It's challenging and confusing sometimes, but to make your living being in the candy store of sports is really cool work if you can get it.
My final question for you, Josh, like I said, you've been so gracious with your time, is as you reflect on your career, I'm not sure how often you do it anyway, but as you reflect on your career, I mean, you've done so many things. I mean, you've worked with Major League Baseball teams, NHL, NFL. You've hosted a radio show. You're currently working with one of the most prestigious programs in all of college football. I mean, how content are you with your career? Is there something you'd like to do in 10 years, maybe an event you haven't done yet? I mean, as you just reflect on your career, are you content? Is there something else you would like to do?
Well, selfishly, never broadcast a big championship win for somebody. When I first broke in doing AAA baseball in Rochester, New York, my very first year, so it was 1990. They won the Governor's Cup, and that was fun. I got a little ring, the whole thing. That was 30 years ago. And, so to do that and to sell it, that was the one disappointment with the Chargers, to never get to, call that Super Bowl win. And close with the Mets, they got there, but they didn't win it. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but we're looking for pimples on Miss America at that point. It's still been a great ride. I've loved every minute of it. Didn't think I'd be doing as many different sports for as many different teams and as many different towns. You'd like to be the Cal Ripken and just have the clean baseball card, so to speak, and just be with one team all your life, like Vin Scully. But it doesn't always work out that way. You got to go where the interest is and where the work is. And the one good thing about all the traveling around that I've done is I've got to meet a ton of really great people and work for great people and learn a lot of things and see the world. So it's been really cool so far, and I'm always interested to see what's next.
Josh, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you about your career, what you're doing right now with UCLA, and so many other ventures. Thank you so much for your time. I can't say how much I appreciate chatting with you today.
Oh, Billy, and very best of you is you jumped in. I mean, you're already doing a strong Australian crawl through the water here. You're doing great, and it'll only get better and better. So continued success to you, and I really appreciate the time.
That's Josh Lewin, the voice of the UCLA Bruins, select announcer for the Red Sox, formerly of the Chargers, Mets, and other capacities. Thanks so much to him for joining us on the latest edition of The Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much for joining us, folks, and we'll see you next time.